Welcome to the AI Policy Podcast, a podcast by the Wadhwani AI Center at CSIS. I'm Gregory C. Allen.
And I'm Andrew Schwartz.
Join us as we dive into the world of AI policy, where we will discuss the implications of this transformative technology and what governments around the world are doing about it. Welcome back to the AI Policy Podcast. I'm Greg Allen, and I'm talking to you today from Paris. We just finished the French AI Action Summit. It was a pretty remarkable gathering, and for that reason, I'm actually coming to you alone this time, which is a bit of an experiment for the AI Policy Podcast. Not something we want to do too often, but we thought it was worthwhile to actually get this episode on the books before the holiday break in the United States. We've got a holiday on Monday, and Andrew was not available, so here we are. What we're going to get into in this episode is what it was like to be at the French AI Action Summit. It was a pretty remarkable event. What France was trying to achieve in this summit. The speech given by Vice President JD Vance in his first foreign address and the first long-form address by the Trump administration on AI policy, as well as the EU response. And finally, the fact that the US and the UK didn't sign the AI declaration coming out of the summit, and the fact that the UK AI Safety Institute, an organization that was born out of the first one of these summits, has just renamed itself as the AI Security Institute. So it's a genuine landmark in AI diplomacy. There's so much of what happened here that I think is going to reflect what we should expect to see over the next weeks, months, and really the rest of this year for AI policy. And let's get right into it. So to begin, the French AI Action Summit was held on February 10th and 11th, Monday and Tuesday of this week. And they hosted at the Grand Palais. Now, this is a building that was constructed in 1897 in Belle Epoque, France, Paris, and it's between the Champs-Élysées and the Seine. It's this incredibly ornamented and embellished building that is so classically French from that period. It's beautiful metalwork, beautiful glasswork, and inside, you really get a sense of the techno-optimism of that period of French history, right? In 1897, this is when steam power has been around for a long time. It's a mature technology that has delivered really exciting revolutions like railroads. And you've got electrification, which is less mature, but at this point, very much well underway. Electric lighting had been a technology that's available for decades at that point. And there was a ton of optimism. And the building and the architecture, you really capture that techno-optimistic with the French flair for grandeur and style that they wanted. It was really the perfect venue for the message that France wanted to send. Now, that venue is huge, and it actually felt, I don't want to say empty, but it did feel spacious compared to the number of people who were there. This summit was much larger than the UK AI Safety Summit. I think France invited close to 100 countries. There was only 1,000 people in that space, but that space, it felt like it could hold 5,000 people. And one of the things that was really fun for me is this meant that a lot of the bigwigs who were there, you know, the CEO of Google, the CEO of Google DeepMind, CEO of Anthropic, Sam Altman of OpenAI, a ton of other bigwigs across politics, civil society, and AI business, all of them were there. And because they only let 1,000 people in, a lot of them didn't have, you know, this massive staff that envelops them and prevents you from just running up and going to talk to them. So that was a lot of fun for me because I got to talk to a bunch of people who I don't always get to talk to every single day. Now, the main action, of course, was in the Grand Palais itself, in that main venue, but there was also a ton of side events organized by civil society, by businesses and others. Some of these were more AI use case specific. So there was one on AI and biotechnology. I was speaking at one on the impact of AI in military affairs, which included a lot of representation from military and AI technology and defense industry leaders around the world. That was held at Les Invalides, which is, of course, the headquarters of the French Ministry of Defense. Also a great event. And I think there was 10 other events that I would have loved to have been able to go to if I could magically be everywhere at once, which of course I can't. And then finally, as you can imagine for these kinds of summits, for the days before, during, after, there's a great cocktail party circuit, a really nice opportunity to meet with folks around the world who are leaders in various aspects of AI. So what did France want out of all of this? Well, I actually spoke with some French diplomats, and literally they encouraged me to download the Mistral AI app, Le Chat. There was a joke going around that Macron was an unpaid salesperson for Mistral because of how much he was doing to promote that company as the French AI national champion. But that's not all he was promoting. And in fact, I think for French President Macron, this was a huge win for him. The day before the summit, on the eve of the summit, he announced a 109 billion euro investment. And his quote on this topic was, "It is the equivalent for France what the United States announced with Stargate." That's a really interesting point. He's trying to say, hey, we, France, are in the mix. We're in the action. It's not just the United States. It's not just China. We are committed to leading in AI. So what's actually in that money? Well, most of it's going to go to data center projects. So America ends up being a big winner, even as France invests a lot in its AI infrastructure. I bet that's going to include a lot of NVIDIA chips. But where did this money come from? Well, around 30 to 50 billion euros of that is via a joint venture with a lot of funding by MGX. And via SoftBank, MGX is also a huge partner of OpenAI's Stargate project. So the Emiratis, the United Arab Emirates, which we released a paper about not that long ago, they are all in on AI. They are throwing huge sums of money around to make sure that their country is well poised to capitalize on this opportunity. And countries like France that are really trying to catalyze investment in this sector, it's no surprise that they're a welcome partner for this. Now, I heard an unconfirmed rumor that the Emiratis also expressed some interest in acquiring Mistral outright. I don't know if that's true. I'm not in a position to confirm or deny that rumor, but I did hear from some French government officials that they would never let that happen. There's no appetite for that whatsoever. But that partnership between the Emiratis and the French, I think that's something to keep an eye on because it really is the nature right now where even though you had DeepSeek, which a few weeks ago everybody was saying, oh, the future of AI is not, $100 billion investments. The future is really cheap open source. Well, just as I said, whether or not the future is open source, the future is still big capital investments in AI technology. And France making big Euro announcements, the European Union making big Euro announcements, all of that reflects the facts that whether the future of AI is open source or closed source, people still think that this is going to be a pretty capital intensive business. You need a lot of money if you want to really seize the opportunity. Well, one of the reasons why you need all that money, of course, is for energy. If you want to have all those data centers, you need a lot of energy. And Macron was really trying to emphasize that France is an ideal partner in this regard because it already has this very well-developed nuclear power plant infrastructure and ecosystem. He had this very colorful quote that I thought was great. He said, in France, we don't need to drill, baby, drill. We just plug, baby, plug. Basically pointing out that all these big tech companies, they still have these climate change commitments about how much renewable energy they're going to purchase and how much non-carbon emitting energy they're going to purchase. And he wanted to say that so many people are saying the future of AI energy generation, at least in the long term, is going to be nuclear power. Well, you don't have to wait for that long term if you partner with France, which I thought was a really strong argument for him to make, even though I'm sure all the manufacturing businesses and steel workers and all other kinds of businesses, they're probably saying, well, we currently buy all of that nuclear power. So you're going to turn it off for us to turn it on for these data centers? Regardless, still a huge win for France. They got this big investment, and that's kind of the reason why some people want to host a summit like this. It gives you an excuse to go talk to so many people around the world and bring them to France to highlight the advantages of France as an investment opportunity, and that's exactly what this government did. And if you look at what else is going on in the French government, they have this big whole of government initiative called French Tech, where they are trying to do absolutely everything they can to support the startup ecosystem of France, and also French startups who are trying to go global. And it's not like they're giving money per se, but they do give you someone in government who you can reach out to when you're encountering any kind of blocker anywhere in the French government system, whether that's getting your desired immigrant employees' visas, trying to figure out how you can get access to real estate, which is a pretty convoluted regulatory structure here in France. They're giving you someone you can call who can try and remove blockers for you, which I think is interesting. And then they're also just trying to actively promote you. If you want to go global, you can talk to the French embassy. They will introduce you to the right people. They will throw parties on your behalf and invite everyone who might be a customer for you or might be a critical partner for you as you go abroad. It's really interesting to see just how much effort France is putting into its tech ecosystem. And this was obviously part of it. Now, one other thing that they were trying to do is to shift the narrative away from, I think, what they would characterize as the doom and gloom vision of AI. And here, I think this comes as implicit criticism of the British approach, because the AI Safety Summit that the Brits hosted in November of 2023 under the prime ministership of Rishi Sunak, that was a time when it was not that long after a bunch of bigwigs in AI had signed a letter talking about the existential risk associated with AI technology. That came after a bunch of notables had signed a letter arguing that there should be a pause in AI research. It's not that AI safety was completely absent from the conversation at the French AI Action Summit, but it was definitely much more on the margins, nowhere near the pride of place, the center focus that it was during the UK AI Summit. I think the central focus for France was, number one, itself and highlighting it as a business partner, but also bringing in this very optimistic tone about what the future of AI can be and the fact that they want to be your partner, they want to be a leader in the world, not just in the research of this technology, which France has been a leader in producing AI research for a really long time, but a leader in the commercialization of this technology. And I thought that was an incredibly noteworthy shift. I'll give you one guess as to who was on board with that shift. It was Vice President JD Vance. He gave a really strong speech about the U.S. vision for AI, the criticisms of the approach that the European Union has taken, not just with AI technology, but with many other technologies. He praised President Macron and the fact that France is trying to shift the conversation away from AI. But he also highlighted the risks of working with China. So I want to read his opening line, which I thought was a really important signal to send. Quote, "I'm not here this morning to talk about AI safety, which was the title of the conference a couple of years ago. I'm here to talk about AI opportunity." Bam. Right there, he's saying, thank you, France, for trying to shift the conversation away from that doom and gloom vision of the Brits. Beyond that, what he talked about was how America is committed to leading in AI. And while that is a desire to lead, it also has a place for other countries, for businesses abroad. That was his first major point. Choose America as your preferred partner. And he highlighted the contrast between your other option, namely China in this case. He expressed a lot of concern about what it's like when you partner with authoritarian countries and how that never ends well for the people who do it. He didn't actually mention China by name in doing that, but it was extremely clear that's what he was saying not to do. His second major point, and here again I think it's worth quoting, "We believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off, and we'll make every effort to encourage pro-growth AI policies. And I like to see that the deregulatory flavor is making its way into a lot of the conversations at this conference." Deregulatory flavor. He was criticizing the European Union's GDPR privacy regulations, also the DSA, which is the large social media platforms regulation. These are areas where Vance is trying to say, Europe, you got it wrong when it comes to the modern internet and the commercialization of the modern internet. That's why you're behind in technology. Don't make the same mistake on AI. And specifically, don't come after American companies. You've seen some requests from those in the business community who are basically saying, if the Trump administration is willing to throw tariff threats around willy-nilly, why not throw some tariff threats at the European Union and tell them to lay off when it comes to attacking American tech companies and using regulation to try and come after American tech companies who are not changing themselves to meet the needs of European regulators. One other thing that Vance added to the conversation that I thought was pretty interesting was a discussion about a, quote, pro-worker growth path. The Republican Party is not especially well known for being beloved by unions. Politically, Democrats historically, for almost all the 20th century, for the first part of the 21st century, were the party of labor. But here you have Vice President Vance making an explicit commitment that they're going to find a way to keep labor represented in conversations about AI. And this comes on the heels of remarks made by OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, where he's talking about how deep research might be able to do something like 5% of all the useful economic activity that human beings are currently engaged in. So this is the Trump administration acknowledging that as AI delivers all of this incredible productivity, there are potential challenges here for labor, and they are going to confront those challenges, but not by foregoing the AI opportunity, by pursuing the AI opportunity, and then figuring out what they need to do to make sure that workers aren't left behind. I thought one of the most important messages that JD Vance communicated was not with words, though, and it was the fact that he left immediately after his speech concluded. Well, who came after him? Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission. So Vance didn't even stick around to hear her remarks. That is a diplomatic snub. There is just no other way to put it. And that is the message that they're trying to send. We are frustrated with you. We are really sick of the way that you're coming after our businesses. And if you think that we're being rude to you, well, it's because we think that your behavior is unacceptable. Now, you don't necessarily have to agree with that, but I do think that's the message they were trying to send. So if Vice President Vance had stuck around in the room, he would have heard that von der Leyen also had a message that was perhaps a bit different from what the EU has previously been known for when it comes to AI policy. First, she said that the EU is going to have a place in the global AI race. She said that leadership is, quote, up for grabs. So the EU is following France in this regard. They're basically saying, look, we understand that the United States is in first place. We understand that China is in second place. We understand that we're in third place, but we don't believe that that has to be the permanent state of affairs. We're going to do things. Now, one of the things that she talked about was a project that might be the equivalent of a CERN for AI. CERN, of course, is the major international collaboration on particle physics that has delivered, major particle accelerators and super colliders to run frontier physics research. But CERN is not really designed for commercial opportunities. It's delivering basic research in physics with the potential hope that a decade or two down the line, some of those breakthroughs in fundamental physics might result in useful economic inventions, or maybe there'll be spin-off technologies invented in the course of doing that. But that's really not, in my own personal opinion, what Europe needs when it comes to AI. The US and China are far ahead of Europe when it comes to commercialization of AI technology. But when it comes to research into AI technology, at least the kind of research that tends to take place in academic settings, not corporate or industrial settings, Europe's doing fine. I mean, they're probably not up there with the United States, but they're much, much closer in research than they are in commercialization. And while I've been knocking von der Leyen for her focus on some kind of collaborative international research project, she did also talk about the AI Champions Initiative, which is trying to pledge 150 billion euros of investment in AI that is focused on commercial and industrial opportunities. Another initiative recently announced by the European Commission is Invest AI, which could be as much as another 50 billion euros. So we're talking 200 billion euros across an unclear number of years, at least not clear to me right now. But again, big sums of money, big investments, capital infrastructure being a non-trivial part of that story. Everybody kinds of get it. So you heard it on this podcast a few weeks ago that DeepSeek did not mean the end of big AI compute investments. I think that's borne out by the behavior not just of the largest, most CapEx-intensive hyperscaling firms and frontier model developers, but also by governments who are trying to seed an entire ecosystem for AI that includes not just those frontier model developers, but more application-specific type companies. Well, while there was a lot of business involvement, a lot of civil society involvement, fundamentally this was a government convening. And one of the things that France was aiming at was a declaration at the end. The Brits at their UK AI Safety Summit concluded with a declaration signed by the member countries who attended. The South Korean Seoul AI Summit concluded with a declaration that was signed by a bunch of countries and governments. So France wanted that too. And they got one. A total of 61 countries signed on to their final declaration. But it's less interesting who did sign on than who did not sign on. And in this case, the United States and the United Kingdom did not sign on. Now, they didn't sign on for different reasons. A UK spokesperson told the Financial Times that the UK's refusal was because the French statement, quote, didn't provide enough practical clarity on global governance, nor sufficiently address harder questions around national security. Now, what's really interesting in that statement by the UK spokesperson is that it doesn't mention the word safety either. Even the Brits are sort of giving up on the safety orientation, and that's for reasons that you've heard on this podcast for months now. The word safety is toxic in Republican political circles. It is associated with political censorship, which was a concern that Vance mentioned repeatedly in his speech. And so when the Brits said we're not happy with what you've done here in this declaration, they didn't mention safety. Instead, they talked about hard questions around national security, clarity on global governance. Those are issues that you can still talk to without sort of crossing political third rails among key allies like the United States, which is led by a president where ideas like diversity, equity, inclusion, or doom and gloom frames of AI are simple non-starters. So why didn't the United States sign on, you might ask, right? Vance's speech talked about deregulation in the air at the summit. So why didn't the United States sign? Well, I'm told it's because France left in some language about multiculturalism, about environmentalism, about multilateralism, and all of this stuff just seemed a little bit too DEI or woke, I guess, in the Republican leadership's mind, and so they refused to sign. I think it also is compatible with Vance's walking out before von der Leyen spoke. They were trying to deliver a snub. They were trying to deliver a rather surprising, perhaps even shocking message, and not signing the declaration helped get that across. So even though the two countries, United States and United Kingdom, didn't sign for different reasons, it's still pretty remarkable that neither of them signed. One final thing here on what the UK is doing as they sort of move away from the safety framing, well, that's now reflected institutionally. The UK AI Safety Institute this week officially renamed itself. It is now the UK AI Security Institute. And I think this is actually appropriate and fine. You're seeing a lot of the leaders, including leaders of the Bletchley Park AI Safety Summit, who are coming out and praising this move because I think it more accurately captures what they want to talk about. And let me just explain one of the concerns here that I'm familiar with that, frankly, I think is credible and does deserve attention and is a national security issue. So bear with me for a moment while I get a little bit long-winded. In World War II, the United States had a bioweapons program. It had an offensive bioweapons program. We thought about dropping bombs full of diseases in World War II. And the budget for this was pretty massive. I think it was something like 1/20th the budget of the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project was like percentage points of GDP. So really, really big money. Even if you're a fraction of that, you're still big money. And after World War II, the United States government was trying to figure out whether or not they still wanted to have this program. And so they ran an analysis that was effectively asking, what is the minimum viable size of a bioweapons program? How much can you shrink this before it all just falls apart? When the U.S. Army ran that study, what they concluded ultimately that the minimum viable size for a bioweapons program was still thousands of people. at least half of whom are going to have to be technical experts, because bioweapons at the time were pretty complicated. If you wanted to put them in bomb canisters, if you wanted to be able to drop them from airplanes, bioweapons were super duper complicated. Now, fast forward to the late 1990s, and there is a terrorist organization in Japan called Shinrinkyo, and some of the most amazing work analyzing this terrorist group has been done by Richard Danzig, who's a former U.S. Secretary of the Navy, and actually interviewed a lot of the members of this terrorist organization in jail in Japan. And what he found out is that the number of technical experts that Shinrinkyo needed to come extremely close to successfully developing their own offensive bioweapons was actually like half a dozen technical experts, most of whom are grad students. They don't even have their PhDs. And so the cost and complexity of developing offensive bioweapons after World War II to the end of the 20th century has already fallen massively. But you still do need technical expertise. This is still hard to pull off. And what's interesting and what the risk is here is that as you're seeing AI develop all these incredibly exciting opportunities in biotechnology, well, that could also be for good or for ill. And one question that everybody needs to be able to answer is, are AI technologies getting so smart, so capable, developing so much diverse expertise that they could meaningfully assist somebody in trying to develop an offensive bioweapon? Worst case scenario, of course, would be if you take the number of technical experts who need to be a part of your project and you reduce that from a dozen or half a dozen to zero. That's a really, really bad outcome. One person can put the whole world at risk. And this is something that even folks like Mark Zuckerberg, who's a big proponent of open source AI, who's a big opponent of AI regulation, he acknowledges that this kind of what used to be called safety testing, what is now going to be called security testing, does need to apply, and it does even need to apply to open source technology when it comes to AI. So that's a capability that the UK AI Security Institute is really good at. And that institute brings a really strong locus of AI talent. I think they have 70 experts on the technical staff. So like not the policy staff, the technical staff includes 70 people. And these are people who, in many cases, were not that long ago working at the leading AI labs around the world, which is really remarkable when you can get that kind of density of talent on really lucrative technical professional fields to want to serve in government. And so they're providing the services of, hey, we will put your models through the ringer, trying to figure out how we can jailbreak them, trying to figure out how we can get them to do bad things, including bad things that might be relevant for national security type issues. I mentioned the biotechnology one. That's one I'm particularly focused on, but there's plenty of others that I think really deserve consideration. And the reality here is that, OpenAI has done some testing and they found that their earlier models did not pose a significant risk of this type. Basically, they said, our model can help you, but Google can already help you. Reading science textbooks can already help you. But these models keep getting more and more powerful. They keep getting more and more capable. And that's why one test at one point in time, that's not enough for us to feel secure. This is something that we're going to have to keep doing. The other issue is, of course, the models themselves and what types of capabilities they might have that they would pursue in a non-aligned interest, not aligned with the developer, not aligned with the user. And we've seen some really remarkable experiments where the models try and change their own code, try and change the way their reward structure works, try and be deceptive to the people who are actually testing them. And of course, this is all early days, but we expect AI to get 10 times more powerful, 100 times more powerful, 1,000 times more powerful. And so this is the right time to be engaging in really aggressive fundamental research around these types of issues so that as AI gets more and more powerful, we can remain confident that humans remain in control and that the world remains secure even in a world that includes these ultra-powerful technologies. So I commend the UK AI Security Institute for its rebrand. I'm looking forward to what I suspect will be the forthcoming rebrand of the current U.S. AI Safety Institute because, surprise, they're working a lot with the national security community too. If you read the charter of the AI Safety Institute, which was in the National Security Memorandum that came out last year, it talks about all the cooperation they're doing with the NSA on AI cybersecurity robustness testing. It talks about all the cooperation they're doing with the Department of Energy on AI and nuclear-related issues. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for this rebranding to take place. And I think even though you might point to the past few weeks as a really bad time for the quote-unquote AI safety movement, I don't think it's quite as bad as some folks might think or some folks might say. There's still a ton of really important work going on. A lot of that work still enjoys the support of the leading AI research companies. And I think this new security framing helps clarify for folks what the stakes are and why it's worth investing in, which was kind of my final message to the French government that I had in some of my private meetings with them. You can think about AI safety in a lot of different ways. I think a framing for AI safety that is not especially helpful was one that, safety demands a pause. Safety demands that we stop advancing in AI, shut down all the data centers, let's only work on safety for a decade, and then we can maybe start doing frontier research. I think it's just impossible to put that into practice given the reality of current geopolitics. But I think an alternative frame that safety or security is a capability that you invest in. It's a organization, a group of people, a suite of technical tools that you can invest in them now, and you're going to be extremely glad that you have them later. And that's something that I think is worth fighting for. That's something that I think is worth continuing. And that's something that I think is actually completely compatible with the outcome that we saw from the French AI Action Summit. France, of course, has created its own AI Safety Institute. And so while I think the emphasis has changed, I think in many ways that emphasis is still positive, still helpful, and completely compatible with a vision for AI that is excited about all the benefits that it's going to bring. So this is me signing off from Paris. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the AI Policy Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We also love to hear from you, so reach out at aipolicypodcast@csis.org with your suggestions and feedback. Finally, don't forget to visit our website, csis.org, for our latest research reports and events. This podcast was produced by Sarah Baker, Isaac Goldston, and Sadie McCullough. See you next time.